Good morning, everyone. I am just making sure that we're spotlighting Sanjay and Stuart. This session will be recorded today. I'm just making sure that everybody is allowed in. Okay. Good morning, everyone from the UK. It is 10 a.m. here, and thank you for joining us from wherever you are. I'm Nolene Hammond-Jones. I am the Deputy Head of the Lancaster University Management School Careers Team. Long name on that one. I'm really delighted that you joined us for an Inspired Global Networks talk today on the subject of leading beyond boundaries, navigating the new era of people, technology, and work. So I would like to say thank you to Stuart and Sanjay for joining us today. And I'm going to hand over to Stuart.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, or wherever you are joining us from. Big thank you to Lancaster University for allowing me to host this series of webinars, which I'll tell you a little bit more of when we get to the end of this hour. The obviously title will stay the same, Leading Beyond Boundaries, and obviously today we're looking at navigating the new era of people, technology, and work. It's a massive, broad spectrum there. Myself, just give you a little bit of background. I'm ex-forces, British Forces, delivering leadership and development training across all three services at lots of different levels. I've been out 8 years working in business and myself, consultancy, and doing some fantastic things like podcasts and webinars for very high performing people in leadership. Today we've got Sanjay here. So Sanjay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Stuart, and pleasure to be here and a privilege to be here on this event. For me, I think throughout my career, fascinated with learning, and therefore got into a career of creating learning experiences through different kinds of media, and then into people consulting. I think the opportunity to work in different cultures across the world in different sectors, I think that's a very, very big benefit of this work. And 2018 is when I finished my second master's in research from Lancaster University. And one of the biggest gifts of that was that I focused on my work since then, which is in the area of transition. And I set up my own consulting piece, practice called At Intersections. Very happy to be here with you, Stuart, and with the audience. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I just want to tell you a personal anecdote, actually. I would normally be hosting these in my office at home, but I've had to move. And I think on a global scale now that we are playing in a global playground and that hybrid world. And I'm actually sat now at Lilleshall, which is the GB Centre for Gymnastics, Archery and Trampolining. It used to be the GB Centre, so the England Centre for Football. And it also reminded me when I walked around this morning about creating those environments for high performance and the responsibility for people and organizations to set those environments. So it's been really nice that we can move around now and be quite adaptable, capable in a lot of different things that we can then role model and transition, and a lot of things that we have control over as well. So like I said, we are actually looking at so many opportunities to grow and scale businesses, our skills. I always say a lot of the work I do is heightening people's self and situational awareness of all the things that are on I use the word playground, on the global scale at the minute, regards to people, technology, time zones, well-being, and hopefully we'll touch on a lot of these as we go through this conversational session with myself and Sanjay. For the audience, we don't want you to just listen along, and we've got the chat and the Q&A section. So please feel free to add comments, reflections, questions. If I see opportunities, I will mention those in the flow that we have. I've got 3 key questions I'm going to be firing at Sanjay. But a lot of the things that you will add value to will be future sessions. So the questions, the reflections, and the relevance of what you see in your worlds, based around what me and Sanjay will have a conversation around in the next 45, 50 minutes. And a big sort of recognition that we've got with us today, students, alumni, employers, and people within the University of Lancaster and the Management School as well. So, Sanjay, I hope you're sitting comfortably. I will actually verbatim read out the first question for you, and I'd love to know your thoughts. We've only given Sanjay a little bit of a pre-warning of what these questions are, so hopefully you've got some good added value to these. So when we're talking about leading beyond boundaries, what boundaries are leaders actually navigating today, and how have those boundaries changed in a global hybrid world?
So I think part of the question is easier because I think I'm from the 1960s generation, so I've sort of seen that change. Part of the question is tougher too. So I think I was trying to think about this, and I was just thinking that not only in the early years of my career, but I think even 15, 20 years back, to use a cinema metaphor, life was simpler. We were looking at a close-up, right? And you showed up to work, you finished your stuff, and you were back at a reasonable time in the evening. I think disruption, uncertainty, the prevalence of the VUCA world wasn't that high. But today, if you look at it, leaders are grappling with, they are constantly having to zoom out, which is what often we call the 60,000 feet view to, the helicopter view, you're down to 60 feet, right? But I think the single biggest change is the fact that it is now a genuinely interconnected world, right? The people, senior managers, leaders are constantly having to bring the outside in, not just in terms of investors and consumers and so on and so forth, but there are so many diverse threads, right? This geopolitics, technology, supply chains, climate events. The biggest thing which is coming in is, to me, which is extremely daunting, is governance and compliance. I mean, just yesterday in India, we signed up the free trade agreement with the EU, the European Union and India, right? And there's a lot of coverage around that. But the devil lies in the detail. This has to be ratified by 27 countries, right? And it'll take about a year before it comes into effect. We are so for a leader to be able to anticipate future cash flow, right? It is hard. It is, and if I was to bring it down to three themes and then toss it back to you, Stuart, I would say leaders today have to not only run the business, which has been a traditional ask, they have to envision the future, kill business models which are getting obsolete, anticipate new business models, while all the while caring for the people with them.
Yeah, do you know, I love that. And as you were just saying then, I just wrote down timings, because it's very much in my old world as well. There was a comical thing of speed up to slow down. So there's that element of how long things take and how good we can be and effective we can be with our communication. And then specifically in the COVID period of time, I saw a really big move from that. We were really encouraged to be proactive and have business plans, have business trajectories for 3 to 5 years. However, in those times, the businesses and the leaders that thrived are the ones that tore up those pieces of paper, and they had to go to their reactive leadership skills they had to do something. And when I first started my first ever podcast, my back was firmly against the wall, and I had that mentality of got to do something over nothing. And you're right, it's a battle sometimes, isn't it, to go, how fast should we be going? From your experience, you mentioned technology there. Have you got some examples of good practice on this sort of, I sometimes call it a roller coaster of up and down, left and right, and it's constantly moving? What control can leaders have, and what best practice can they have in that world of trying to get control?
So when you say, so just to get a little texture, Stuart, when you say technology, are you saying best practices around the usage of technology by leaders?
Yes. Yeah, I suppose technology is a big thing now that we have at our fingertips to control internal communication, external communication, leadership with teams. What have you seen that being used to maybe speed up or slow down?
So I think if I look at some of the examples, I think in the best practices, what I see are leaders who keep in the center how human beings behave, right? So they never lose the sight of the fact that human behavior is universal and is also driven by biology, right? So what do I mean by that? So one example I was given by a lady called Vinita Bali, previous managing director of a very big Indian firm, Britannia Industries. These were the days of BlackBerry. So I had written an email and we were discussing something. Then she said, Sanjay, anything I need to scroll down, I won't read it. Now this is not an exotic or very very breakthrough algorithm, right? It's very simple, but the lesson I came away with was less is more, right? So leaders who use technology also try and understand the usage. So for example, I saw so when they write emails, so there is this email, and in the two there are about a dozen people because you're sending it globally, and it's addressed. In the two there are two blokes, and in the CC there are about a dozen people, and in the CC people don't know what's going on because it's a big mail, right? So what am I supposed to do with it? And there was this Dutch startup I used to work with, and I saw the CEO, Sukhbir. He used to write down for everybody in the CC, Stuart, you need to watch out for this. Sanjay, you need to focus on this. So I knew why I was reading that email, right? I wasn't taking that stress. Also, when you're using tools, for example, when you're using Teams or Canva or how so many tools are there, I think leaders are clear about, good managers and leaders clarify expectations. So the art of meeting management. This is a brainstorming chat. So just because we are on Teams and I wanted to understand last quarter's numbers from you, it doesn't drift into something where I say, hey, why don't we get Stuart into this? Hey, why don't we get Noeline into this? Hey, why don't we get so-and-so into this? And suddenly you have created disruption, right? So I think being very clear that why am I in this meeting, and then leveraging technology for that purpose.
Yeah, I think you're right. The technology tools that we probably all know and use, and that's becoming a little bit more easier, dare I say, to do that for us. But staying on that kind of leader's responsibility and leader's opportunity, you made me chuckle a little bit when you said about those emails where the person, I call it, they're on send. So they're on send because they've been sitting on lots of things for maybe a week, and then they'll send an email out and it's got everything on that email, rather than taking those micro moments to communicate through the week. And again, I'm using an analogy here of maybe just not doing stuff during the week and sending everything on a Friday. And then obviously we're suddenly in the weekend and people don't pick that up until Monday, if they're on a traditional Monday to Friday. And I think that allocating that time and taking that time at that moment, because I always say that those short-term pains for long-term gains, like rather than having that kind of stacking everything up. And you reminded me of a little story about taking control, and I'll take it completely left field here. One of the environments I used to work in was on the riverbank. So we used to do a lot of canoeing and kayaking. And when you coach canoeing and kayaking, you say that you should never be with the flow, because if you're with the flow of the water, the river will take you where it wants to be, where it'll take you to that rock, for example. You should always either be slower than the flow or faster than the flow, because then you're in control. So that whole analogy of how you coach somebody to be better at canoeing and kayaking is relevant to leadership. It's relevant to you. If you're the flow is just you've been in the business for 5 days and the business has just literally eaten you up. and you've not been in control. Go for it.
Yeah. If I may just add to that, Stuart, I think to your point of best practice, I think smart leaders, they don't get carried away by the newness of technology, that we've got a new toy, what can it do for us? I think where they're focused is, what is the impact that I want? What is the kind of experience that I want? So they're very sensitive to context, that I'm going to be sending this message out. Maybe this quarter earnings have dropped, or maybe the new prototype hasn't moved well. How do I phrase this? What time do I send it? Right? What is the medium? Should this be an email, or should it be a quick 10-minute, 15-minute town hall?
Yeah.
Through remote. So am I delivering good news? Maybe even an email, but especially if I'm delivering something which is sensitive, right? What is the tool I should use? So I think they're tuned into the mind share and the impact it will create.
Yeah, I like that. I think that can be summed up with just saying, and I think people kind of know this, but it's whether they do it. It's trying to be intentional. I think that's the word, isn't it? Intentional. Is there an intent? Have you, going back to my analogy of that, have you got control? Are you just doing it because you've been told to do it? Are you doing it because that's just how you've seen other people do it? Or you're intentionally trying to do best practice?
And I think on that intentional, that's such a powerful thing that you're saying in this context of technology. I think it's also about how aware you are of why you are doing it, right? Which is the source of intentional. I remember working with a senior leader from an international aid organization, and one of the biggest issues her team had with her was that they said we keep getting bombarded with emails over the weekend, and it's stressing us out, right? And late night. And the simple answer to that was, the leader said, "Hey, listen, I don't want them to work on the weekend. I'm just clearing my outbox." So the simple answer to that was scheduled send.
Yeah.
I mean,
you know what, Sanjay, that some of the things that I facilitate in rooms of execs and leaders, it's exactly what it's so simple, but it's human behavior. It's until you have that conversation outside of the busy being busy, and also the pleasure and the honor I have as being an external person. I've had lots of stories where that external influence just has that impact of people going, oh yeah, how simple, why don't we do that? So perfect. Okay, so I think this is overlapping into my next question. So I'm going to ask another question because we're going into technology anyway. And I think it's a nice flow through. So technology has removed many barriers. We said about barriers to leaders, but it's also created new ones. How should leaders think about connection, availability, and well-being in this new era of work? So some of the things that I've sort of written under this is the always on culture that you alluded to, but I think it'd be really interesting to dig into that a little bit more. Global meeting times. I work with lots of people who have got global responsibilities. So earlier, on later. And I mentioned earlier on about the traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I think that is probably in a lot of sectors moved now. The burnout, self-imposed boundaries, the accountability to self as a leader as well, to take back control. So any thoughts on that?
So I think what I see, again, to borrow from your previous queue of best practices, what I see happening, I think are two ends of the spectrum. I think one is the those who are self-aware and intentional and organized, right? Versus the completely other extreme, which is, I've woken up now, so it's time for action, right? So, and a lot of us fall somewhere in the middle. But I think when we speak of people, leaders who are working across geographies and who are impacting people across geographies, across cultures, across time zones, or even within the same country, I think they're very clear about what they want out of an interaction. I think that sharpness of why this conversation is happening, whether it is a one-to-one performance conversation, or it's a quarterly sales review, or it's a monthly review of data, right? I think they are also very clear in setting expectations. So to your point of burnouts and 24/7. So there are people who say, I don't want surprises. Give me a heads up. If you are not prepared, don't present. Right? I remember working with this senior management team where it was fairly laissez-faire to begin with. And then finally we reached a point where the decks needed to be, the PowerPoint decks everybody needed to present, got locked in 24 to 48 hours before the monthly review. So then no one had an excuse that I didn't have time to read your deck, right?
Yes.
I think setting those expectations. So for example, smart leaders I see do two things. One, they do many things, but in my opinion, they do two things. And for the sake of this conversation, they also drive meetings towards decisions, right? Not hail fellow, well met, or that's great, that's a great idea. Why don't we talk more? Why don't we set up another meeting to talk about this, right? So like an amoeba. I think the other thing, to borrow from David Rock's book on quiet leadership, they also help surface dilemmas, right? Why are we stuck here, right?
Yes.
Because this 24/7 thing can also be misused, especially in the you're an entrepreneur yourself, right? We can say we are a startup and an entrepreneur, and hence we've got to be proactive all the time.
Yeah.
So I think this this is the inner clarity coming from the leader. I think what goes without saying, but we must say it, is that sensitivity to culture and geographies and other people's lives, right?
Yes.
But I think the bigger driver is, am I organized and do I communicate my expectations clearly?
I like that. I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. I'm going to swing back to something that you said, because I only heard this saying a couple of weeks ago, and I'm definitely going to keep using it. So a CEO mentioned to me that they have a high tolerance for bad news and a low tolerance to surprises. So that whole thing about communication, that they're quite happy to hear bad news and hear negative as long as they hear it quickly. And again, that communication piece of how frequently are we talking? I say several times of, wouldn't it be great if we just had conversations and talked? And it's amazing how many people are in that busy state, and they go, yeah, why don't we just have? And again, this is one of the things you mentioned it earlier on about almost having a no agenda meeting and not having that sort of, don't go. I've just written meetings on my pad here, because we could probably do a whole hour plus just on meetings, effective meetings. You hear all the time we have meetings for meetings. They're not focused on results, which you mentioned then. Going back to the technology piece about that communication, I've written down here role model, non-negotiables, and culture. You mentioned culture. There will be a lot of people that are trying to, they're on that being busy, trying to please everybody, trying to do everything for everybody. I think you alluded to a little bit regards to the more you activate more people, the better things happen. But when are we using that space to go away from communicating what everybody already knows? So what I'm talking about here is an extreme example of having a meeting where you as a leader talk most of the time. You've actually talked about all the things that everybody already knows before they came on the meeting. And how do we change that focus to how can we use this time productively to communicate, talk honestly, and problem solve?
So I think, I studied anthropology, thinking I'll go into genetics, but I loved social anthropology, and then I literally drifted into an MBA. But I now realize I'm using a lot of that anthropology in my own work, because when you say culture, what are we talking about? We're talking about ways of working, because the way we work becomes our culture, right? Do we show up on time? Do we not show up on time? Do we keep our phones on silent and aside, right? These are ways of working which become a culture, right? And norms. So I think what, again, smart managers, smart leaders tend to recognize is that human beings have different needs, right? And so does a business cycle or an institutional work cycle. I mean, whether you're in a corporate or an NGO or in the military. So there are meetings around status reviews, data, right? So how are we doing month on month, week on week, right? Then there are meetings around, where is it that the leadership should be focused on, which is more picking up a couple of things and doing deep dives, right? Unpacking things, which is going back to, surfacing dilemmas or anticipating the future. And then there are the meetings driven by exigency, ad hoc, kind of a thing. So I think recognizing that our different needs require different forums or fora, so let's keep the review a review. So smart leaders start observing that a review which should take 30 minutes, data driven, should not morph into a troubleshooting kind of a where you are adding more people. I was given this feedback when I was a young manager creating learning content for children. And I asked my manager to sit into this meeting. And he gave me just one feedback. He said, Sanjay, your meetings shift from data to troubleshooting to firefighting to strategizing what is going to happen next. Right? So I think recognizing this reality and creating the space for it. I mean, during COVID, we had these virtual coffee, sessions.
Yeah.
Which just and I think the other thing being coming from the forces, you will appreciate, Steve, preparation.
Yeah.
I often wonder that management professionals, unlike chartered accountants, lawyers, medical professionals, or mission critical team members, we just show up sloppily making PowerPoints in a cab, and then we are just kind of ready to present. That rigor isn't somehow that consistent. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, do you know what? On one of my podcasts, I interviewed Rory Underwood, who was an England international rugby player, and he was also RAF pilot. And back in the day, he was playing for England, but he was not a professional rugby player because it was before rugby became a career where you could get paid, and which still amazes me. And he brought up something where he said it's interesting when you look outside of the military bubble, as I call it, that we spend 90% of our time training to do our job 10% of the time. But then when you look at the corporate world outside of the military bubble, you spend 90% of your time doing your job and 10% of the time training. And 5% of that is probably mandated training. And if you're lucky, 5% or more like 2% is on personal professional development. So when we're looking at how can we have an individual but then organizational impact, when I work with organizations, that they are expanding that percentage. So the percentage and the impact it has on the work percentage is massive. So you might be actually leaning into doing more of 10% personal development, time out, time to think, and you can do this as an organization, but you could also do this individually of trying to get that percentage higher, because ultimately it'll have a effect on the output.
And I think as you were speaking, what struck me is that I think one is the shift towards investing in yourself. And you and I have spoken earlier about being self-aware about investing in yourself. I think that's the first thing. And recently, in fact, last year I was working with Professor Steve Cady, who heads the organization design and change setup at the Bowling Green State University in Ohio. We published a paper, The Little Space in Between, in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Sciences. So the basic thought around that is the power of the pause. Smart leaders know, like smart football coaches, soccer coaches, cricket coaches, they know when to call a timeout. They on themselves and on the team, right? Because it is in the pause that introspection, reflection, whatever we coaches or facilitators talk about, right? I mean, even skilling your own self. So when I see media every day overwhelmed with stories of how AI is this mantra to nirvana, right? I mean, I come across people who are so worried about being left behind that they don't know what AI is. They haven't equipped themselves for AI, right? Or they're joining classes on what AI can do for your business, run by people who perhaps themselves have taken the content from another such class, right? But you are running several businesses. You can only transform if you know where you are today. What is the content of your business model, your people? Otherwise, technology is what? It can become a Frankenstein.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And again, just as we transition on to the third question as well, I liked what you said earlier on about what can we do about this? And you mentioned about you having somebody give you feedback from your
Right,
meetings. I think we can
right.
all learn from that. And again, I have the privilege of doing that, but we can do that internally of organizations as well as externally. I've done more and more courses over the last couple of years where there's been a large organization that is either made up of a group and they've got several companies and they bring employees together from different sectors, different locations, different parts of the business. So they've seen the value of having somebody with no agenda, no, just positive intention to bounce off some ideas or sit in a meeting with them to go, can you just come and just from your perspective, see how we're getting on, how I come across as a leader. You're right, it's only till you have that external accountability and that investment in, are we doing the best? Because if you don't, you only see what you see and you're sort of presented with just the reflection of your thoughts. So yeah, go for it, Sanjay, go for it.
I just wanted to, this is such an outstanding point that you brought in. It has also immense cultural resonance. One of the hardest thing for leaders to do is to give feedback. There is culture. There is also now norms. You just want to make sure you are not sort of discouraging people. You are being culturally sensitive and so on and so forth. And I remember we were working for a Central Asian organization, and we asked them, do you give feedback? And they said, feedback is phenomenal here. It's 100%. So we said, okay, half our work is done. And as we explored further, one gentleman said, we all give feedback. So we said, okay. And then he said, as managers, we give feedback to everybody. So then we said, do you complete the feedback loop? Do you ask for feedback at the end of a performance conversation, right? They said, asking for feedback? No way. We give feedback. So it is like you have a parent, another parent.
Yeah.
Anyway, today parents are also buddies. But I've seen, earlier I used to think we in the East, West Asia, Africa, Asia, we are focused on relationships, and hence we hesitate with direct feedback. But having worked in Europe and in the US, I realized nobody wants to unsettle things. And one of the things we figured out was we created a 360 degree tool, but we don't call it 360-degree feedback. We call it, this is a 360-degree perception map. Because perception is reality. So you may disagree with perception, but you must know how internal and external folks perceive you, because that's your brand.
Yeah, I like that.
So
do you know, just as we go to the last question, you've just reminded me about something else. So I can't do it here. I know we've got our own video, but I'll talk you through what if I'm in the room and I do talk about feedback cultures. I accidentally came across this because it was a conversation in the room, and I thought there's a really good way of explaining this. So I say I get a wad of A4 paper, and I say if you take one piece of paper, and I just start passing it around between people in the room, and I say a feedback culture is that we're constantly passing around pieces of A4 paper, as a bit of a analogy, metaphor, whatever. And then I say, if we don't have a feedback culture, I then pick up the rest of the A4 paper, which is in a slab, and I move over to the table and I drop it on the table in front of somebody and say, if we don't have a feedback culture, we've now, after 6 months, got to have a conversation about this slab of paper, because that's now a feedback slab of paper, and I'm uncomfortable having this conversation because we've not spoken for 6 months, and you're uncomfortable with this conversation because you're like, what is this? Like, where's all this come from? You've obviously been sitting on all this feedback, all these thoughts. Why haven't you spoken to me? So that's a really interesting and fun activity to do when you're with groups of people and you're trying to encourage a feedback culture, because all it is passing pieces of paper to each other and creating that culture that this is how we operate. We talk to each other. And you need to and sometimes we can put labels on it with feedback, but ultimately the simplicity of we've got a culture where we have conversations and we chat to each other. So Sanjay, I'm conscious of time. Yeah, go on, sorry, go on.
No, I just said brilliant point, and I'll keep that in mind. And one, I'm also watchful of time. So just one thing I'll add is, I notice one thing. Entrepreneurs, wherever they are absolute realists in confronting feedback because their focus is ROI.
Yes.
They don't have to please anybody, but just get the ROI. Right. So they are absolutely courageous in taking feedback and confronting reality. I'll stop here. Back to you.
No, fantastic. Again, these are why we've got fantastic questions, because we could talk all day. So I encourage everybody at this moment of time, before we go on to the last question, is please do pop into the comments and the Q&A your thoughts. Can you resonate with these conversations, ideas, and lots of things? So we will take on all this feedback. I thought I'd use this time productively for future sessions and future topics. So please do populate those for us. So last question. So for students, early career professionals and employers listening today, what mindsets and behaviors matter most if we are to thrive and not just survive in this new era of people, technology and work? So the main thing there is, what mindsets and behaviors matter most to thrive? I've got some things here about self-leadership, curiosity and adaptability, sustainable performance, and the employability lens. But over to you, really. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a great question again. I mean, you've made me do a lot of homework, but that's all helpful. I think I'll go back to a conversation I was having with Nolene, actually, who's on the call today, who introduced us. And I think one of the biggest thoughts which came out of those conversations was being for anybody, but especially for people who are stepping into the world of work and technology, or who are have still a long way to go, unless some gray-haired guys like me, is be the CEO of your own career. Gone are the days when we said, okay, the organization is another home. There is a mom and dad who's going to sort of look after me, my promotions, my bonuses, my direction. I don't think young people do that anymore, but I think it's imperative that I think almost, if I was to stretch it, what the CEO, the kind of podcasts and reading and access the actual designated CEO of an organization has, people who are aspiring to be there, I think need to access, if not all of it, some of it. So what are you reading? What are you listening to? Whom are you meeting? Right? So because one has to strategize one's own career. And I think in that, being the CEO, some of the most fundamental things, at least I know I've gone awry and I've seen others go awry, there is work with people whose intentions and values resonate with yours. We hear a lot about toxic culture, toxic managers, toxic leaders, and so on and so forth, and its impact on mental well-being and health. But Stuart, if I sense that your vibe and mine is the same, your intentionality is the same, you may not have listed it down that I'm transparent, I'm courageous, I'm care. You may not have, but if I sense that, I'd love to work with you, right? Then it's not a stretch. But if I sense dissonance, and yet I'm carried away by the fact that Stuart is the hiring manager of a big multinational where I could hopefully one day get a foreign assignment or two, then, unless I have a really thick skin, I'm letting myself into a world of pain. So, so I think that, and the third thing you mentioned employability, that look for opportunities which increase future jobs, resume value rather than only the paycheck at the end of the month. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I'll probably come back to you with final thoughts actually with the timing. But there's something that I love. You've made me think about a couple of things. So one of the elements of so how can we have control over that? And as leaders, what can we do? It's well publicized, and I've had the privilege of working with some quite phenomenally high performing teams and people, either in the forces or out the forces. And I always bring this up in the corporate world because the complexity factor is times 10. And when you look at high performing teams, they do the opposite. They strip it back and go back to basics. They're world beaters at the basics. Go back to simple things, and then we can build back complexity. So sometimes that's stop and think, go back to basics and build complexity back again. And again, that's taking that control. It's giving yourself time. After 12 months of me being out into the military bubble that I mentioned, I sat down and realized that there was a lot of busy being busy, but everybody else had a theory, a concept, and I wrote down these 4 L's of leadership. So look, listen, learn, lead. And there's a couple of things in there that you've mentioned just now. There's how simple is it? There's just look at what's in front of you. Stop and listen. Don't say anything, just listen. The lead is actional, do something over nothing. But the learn, you'll probably know what I'm going to say now because I shared one of my podcasts with you, the Gary Ridge episode. So Gary Ridge was the global CEO of WD-40 company. And the global CEO of an organization sharing the fact that he got to the global CEO-ship and then realized that he didn't know all the answers. And he shared the story where he moved from Australia to America, got the global CEO-ship, and took himself off to university to learn about leadership. So that was a real key thing that I keep referring to because you said about learning. I go back to that lifelong learning. Some leaders go, I've got to have all the answers. When I get to a certain level, it's perceived that the leaders of organization have all the answers. We don't. We're human. That lifelong learning is so pinnacle for me when I've listened to so many other people.
When you were speaking, I think as you trigger this lifelong learning thing, I think a couple of things which strike me. I mean, for our aspiring leaders, whether they're students or they're young adults already in organizations, and even for mature leaders, I think a couple of things which strike me. I think one is lifelong learning is the antithesis of perfectionism, right? So we don't need to be perfect. We just need to show up and deliver something, and that's how we learn. So I think two aspects of leadership which come up, which are also related to feedback and how you make people. It's one is, how do leaders embrace failure and role model it? And second is, I can give the hardest possible feedback as long as I do not violate personal dignity. I don't have to shout, throw a tantrum, and debase someone, right? I think for aspiring leaders, I would also say, to your point of lifelong learning, go to the masters in the fields that you wish to be. Top accountant, top technology person, top sales guy, fall at their feet and say, hey, I need to shadow you. I need to be with you. Yeah. And most people would love it, right? Because there's nothing, everybody's happy to share wisdom. So I think these are some things which your thought of lifelong learning triggered in my mind. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? There's no time like the present where we have webinars, podcasts, where we can books, what the learning opportunity and the role modeling and listening is so opportunistic that you can. It's just that time, isn't it? That time investment. But when you find the time and make the time, it gives you back tenfold. What was I thinking then? Oh, that was it. So I referenced my podcast that I started, and we did 3 years, 148 episodes. And one of the things that really made me think, and I was very surprised about, was the caliber of people I had on there. You'd think they would have perfect role models, they'd have a great environment, they had great teachers, great universities, almost, dare I say, an easy ride. But as you can imagine, it was the opposite. Like all these people are very, you said that go and find the people that are at the top of the field and the top of the industry you want to work in, and you'd be surprised that their learning has exponentially grown from failure, from bad experiences, from getting it wrong and learning and doing it again differently. That's the one thing that shone from me. When you speak to all these people, you think there's this, what's the word, rose tinted glasses, that everything's great and they've had an easy ride. It's far the opposite. So Sanjay, just to give you an opportunity for your final thoughts, I know you saw you're just going to jump in, but just if you could summarize and have some final words, and then we've only got a few minutes left and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so I think for final thoughts, I'll not repeat what I had said earlier, but I think maybe I'll reference what I said earlier, that to me, anybody who's responsible for an institution, a community, or even a family has to get the daily bread and butter in, has to anticipate and envision the future, and has to care for the people. I think that's the core. But I think going back to something earlier you'd asked me about enabling technology, I think smart leaders also use technology to simplify things, right? Encourage their people to adopt new technology, which can take away the routine and the mundane away from them, right? And therefore create the space and time and mind share to focus on the truly critical. And I will end with what I have always loved. There is a small book by Peter Drucker, The Effective Executive. And in that he says the task of the executives, the senior executives of a corporation, I would say leaders, is to anticipate and work on the future. All right. So I think that is where we need to be, and therefore bring back technology and people to serve where we need to be in the future, rather than technology as a toy. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Great. Sorry, Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to staying now connected with you, which we are now. So fantastic. Thank you so much. So with my, I will put my military hat on here, because we always get told 5 minutes before to be anywhere. So to hopefully finish 5 minutes before today, I just want to thank Lancaster University and the LUMS Careers team for inviting me on to host, and I look forward to future webinars with some really amazing people to interview and have some great conversations. Please do comment, put your Q&As in your chat function for future opportunities, for us to drive great conversations that are going to add value to you and drive you forwards in your leadership journey. And I'll pass back. So thank you so much for inviting me on to host as well, and I look forward to future sessions.
Thank you so much, Stuart and Sanjay. That's fantastic. Really appreciate you doing today's session, and thank you everyone for coming. I did note that somebody has mentioned that they've had a bit of an issue engaging with the chat. If you've had any issues, please do let me know. I can pass on any queries or any questions directly to Stuart and Sanjay after today's session. But yeah, thank you everybody for contributing to today's conversation. It's great to see so many people really appreciating what's been discussed. And this session today was recorded. We will make it available on our YouTube channel, but I will also make sure that anybody who's registered for today's session does get a copy of the recording as well. I know Stuart and Sanjay may put something together as well after this, and if there is any further resources, we will share that with you. So thank you so much for today, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.